Okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it is my privilege to welcome you here tonight on behalf of the Women's Bet Midrash as a representative of the Women's Bet Midrash. Amazing to be in another new shul in Efrat. That's a very good idea. Excellent idea.
Come closer.
And I'm here with two hats to welcome you on behalf of the Bet Midrash and to dedicate the shiurim tonight on behalf of my family, the Morris and Pushit family, in memory of our grandparents, one of which I'll come back to, and in memory of my father, Conrad Morris, Shmuel Moshe Ben Yisrael, and my uncle who passed away this month, just a couple of weeks ago, Charles Corman, Yoshua Lev Ben Avraham, Yoshua Lev Ben Yosef. And I'd like to take just a minute of your time to say something about my uncle, because it should be tonight should be Le'ilu Nishmato. Shiva, she had a complete Shiva, more than a complete Shiva. It took so long to get him here from England. But his Shoshim was cut short with Rosh Hashanah, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to say something Le'ilu Nishmato. And just thinking about it, I've realized over the last few weeks the enormous difference between my uncle and my father. My father was they were both people who believed very, 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 very strong Zionists and very, very involved in Jewish philanthropy. And yet they had completely opposite ways of doing things. And I never realized growing up that must have created some tension between them. My father believed in leading by example, that everybody has to know that you're giving so that they will give. And he didn't like that, but he believed that was what you have to do, and he made sure that he did it. And he involved people in giving by saying, I'm giving, give with me. Do this together with me. Which I realize that this is not an appeal, but I realize that that's the way I talk to people when I ask them to make a donation to the Women's Bet Midrash. This is something that I believe in, this is something that I support, this is something that I've been doing for 25 years, help me do it. And my uncle never let anybody know what he did. He didn't need anybody to know anything, and he didn't want anybody to know anything. And it's only now that I'm beginning to realize the extent of what he did. He didn't, it wasn't that he gave enormous amounts of money or that anybody knew what he gave. He encouraged people to set up foundations for giving. He had good clients, strong clients, wealthy clients, and he persuaded them, this is something that you're going to enjoy, this is something that's going to make your life richer, this is something which is going to bring something really special into your life. And he persuaded the law partner this founding partner in his law firm to open a foundation to give scholarships to young lawyers, two in England, one in Israel, to come from Israel to England for law training. He persuaded who was involved in Charles Claw when he founded the Claw Foundation. He believed in showing people that when you give, you get as much as you give. And as I said, he did everything very quietly and nobody knew, because he was a lawyer and he was the picture of discretion, and that's the founding principle of the law, that nothing goes further than the lawyer. And he did that in all of his life. And I think that there was nobody who cared more, and yet didn't need anybody to know about the good deed that he did. He didn't need furgun. He didn't need he didn't need anybody's pat on the back. He did what he believed was right, and he did it with all his heart and all his soul. Tonight should be give his soul an aliyah. It's also, yesterday was my grandfather's yortzeit, his father's yortzeit. The reason that I walk around it taking 3 minutes every time I have to explain what my name is. So this year he died on Shabbos Shuvah, and this year Shabbos Shuvah was Vav Tishrei, which was his Yom Tirah. So it's not I checked. It's not a multiple of 19 years, but it still worked out the same day. And of course, my father, Conrad Morris, and one of the things that that my father and my uncle had in common was a friendship with Rabbi Riskin. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Batya Jacobs.
Good segue.
Who is a graduate of Harel, Bet Midrash Harel Smicha program, teacher in YTA High School, and advocate for Aliyah and the Aliyah process, which all of us here tonight know is not something which is the smoothest thing in the world. I still remember the Shabbat that I met you, a very, very long time ago, when Rabbi Riskin lived in one of the little houses in Rimon. And I was I was in Sem, and I imagine that you were in Shewat Lumi.
I was in the
army.
Yeah.
And I came for a Shabbat. It was my first opportunity to introduce my father to Efrat. And we came to Rabbi Riskin for Shabbat, and we ate meals in your house. And that was the first time I met you. And from then on, my father always characterized Efrat as edgeware, which in his eyes was not a compliment.
Be careful, I'm not characterized it as what?
Edgware is a suburb in London, which is not in the centre of anything.
It's a suburb.
Suburb is a good word. So it's my pleasure to introduce you, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Sarah Cha. Thank you.
Yes, in memory and in honor of the Greater Morris family, the patriarchs and matriarchs, who I know have been so dedicated to Torah.
I didn't say my uncle's English name, Charles Corman.
Charles Corman and Corman, Greater Corman families.
Could you speak
louder?
Yes, please.
Sure. Dedicated to Torah, to community, and Baruch Hashem, it's carried down to the younger generations. So thank you. You're a model for us all. Continue to be. Have you ever wondered where the broken tablets are today? You have.
Yeah, I don't know where the Shleiman are either. Under the
Yeah. Well, they have to exist
Under the
somewhere, right? They have to be somewhere.
But maybe they exist within us.
You're skipping to the end.
Oh, we take part of, we make our own movement. We do our own. We don't have
This
the
is
set.
true.
So it could be that part of the broken ones are part of us. We form our own.
Beautiful, beautiful. I agree. Tradition has taught us that the broken luchot were placed alongside the second luchot that Moshe fashioned. And I recently read the essay by Professor David Weiss Halivni, The Breaking of the Tablets and the Begetting of the Oral Law. Have any of you read? It's in a collection of his essays. I was really struck by the connection of those two ideas. And we're going to explore that further. But first, I'd like, together with you, to focus on the narrative that surrounds the story of the breaking of the tablets, which is actually our narrative for awakening repentance. So each time we say the Slichot prayer, right, we actually reenact the drama of Revelation, and it culminates with the refrain of the 13 midot, a God of mercy, loving kindness, and forgiveness. So if we read from Parashat Kitisa, now I'm going to basically bring you, if you have a Chumash, you could follow in the Chumash, but it's really not necessary. I'll read you the basic text from the Torah. Moshe has just received the Torah, the height of spiritual ecstasy, when God says, Lech red, go down the mountain. Ki shichet amcha asher he'elita me'eretz Mitzrayim. Hurry down, for your people, Moshe, who you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside. I'm reading the English from Sephariah. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf, prostrated themselves to it, sacrificed to it, saying, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. God said further to Moshe, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation. So we've gone from the divine to the deviant, and God is furious, and he wants to destroy the entire nation, save for Moshe. But Moshe implores God, right? Vayichal Moshe et pnei Hashem Elokav, vayomer lama Hashem yechara b'cha be'amecha, asher hotzeta me'eretz Mitzrayim b'koach gadol u'biyad chazaka. Would you like me to translate these psukim?
No.
Okay. למה יאמרו מצרים לאמור ברעה הוציאם להרוג אותם בהרים ולכלותם מעל פני האדמה? שוב מחרון אפיך והנחם על הרעה לעמך. זכור לאברהם, ליצחק ולישראל עבדיך אשר נשבעת להם בך, ותדבר עליהם הרבה צערך ככוכבי השמיים. וינחם השם על הרעה אשר דיבר לעשות לעמו. So God had given up on the people. He wants to destroy everybody except for Moshe. But Moshe pleads on the people's behalf. And in fact, God renounces his punishment. Okay, I'm continuing. Vayifen, vayered Moshe min hahar. Right? Goes down the mountain. ושני לוחות העדות בידו, לוחות כתובים משני עבריהם, מזה ומזה הם כתובים. These are the divinely engraved tablets. והלוחות מעשה אלוהים המה, והמכתב מכתב אלוהים הוא חרוט על הלוחות. ויהי כאשר קרב אל המחנה, וירא את העגל ומחולות, ויחר אף משה, וישלך מידו את הלוחות, וישבר אותם תחת ההר. Now Moshe didn't break the tablets when God told him what was going on, right? He pleaded on the people's behalf. But now he comes down the mountain and he breaks the tablets. Now what causes Moshe to break them at that point? Yes?
So they were all singing and dancing and rejoicing in the Avodah Zarah, and that can't be in the presence of the Luchot. These two things cannot be in the same place at the same time.
Definitely the drama seems to point to that direction. You know, when he was on the mountain, right, God told him what was going on. But until he actually saw it with his own eyes, and then he sees it, and as he's coming down the mountain, right, picture Moshe coming down the mountain carrying these divine luchot, and they still continue with their orgy, right? So even though the Midrash brings, you know, the Midrash asks this question, And I was so privileged to learn Parashat Shmot and Sefer Shmot and Parashat Kitisa with Professor Nechama Leibovitz live in Yerushalayim. It was right before. It was the year before we met my parents. I never actually lived with my parents in Efrat. So it was before I went into the army, and it was a tremendous food. And I can still hear her voice as she was reading from the Midrash. אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא משה, לא היית מאמין לי שעשו להם עגל? That's Midrash Rabbah. But like you said, he sees it now with his own eyes, and it seems as if like the disparity between the tablets he's holding, right, and the scene that he's beholding was just too great.
What about the effect, the dramatic effect
Ah,
on the people?
yes.
What did you
And
say? The dramatic
excellent.
effect on the people.
Excellent.
Uh-huh.
It seems to have been calculated, right? He waits, and maybe he was also waiting to see, what their reaction would be, but it seems to be deliberate, right? That he wants to make that impression, a shock effect.
So it could be that he was worried that they were going to make the luchot an egg. So he realized at that point that he couldn't take the luchot to them because they would have used it as another egg. They weren't ready for it.
Interesting.
Right. Also,
They weren't there. They weren't in that place. Yeah.
They also didn't stop when they saw Moshe coming down.
Right. That's right. They just kept on. Absolutely. And that really seems to be the pshat here. Seforno comments, Moshe gave up on the ability of the people to be worthy of receiving these luchot, and maybe there was that fear that you mentioned, it could be. It's very interesting. I hadn't thought of that angle, but it's a very interesting angle. But Moshe's response is definitely forceful and destructive, and it brings down the curtain. And at this point in the story, all logic would dictate that it's really the end. It's the end. I mean, God had given up on the people. The people gave up on God and on Moshe, right? God's emissary. And definitely, one would imagine, like if you're just reading this script, that this promising vision, right, and idea is now just over. But like you said earlier, yes, the breaking of Luchot was very traumatic, but there definitely seems to be an intended purpose, in the timing, let's say, definitely. And as we know, this act was not only deliberate, but it was blessed. And there are several midrashim that justify what Moshe did. They bring various reasons for explaining why Moshe did what he did. Moshe is acting as their defense attorney, right? Like breaking the marriage contract when you discover that there's betrayal, like before you actually set it into effect. The Netziv suggests that Moshe wanted to break the hearts of the people. This is my loose translation, because I did not find a translation for the Ha'emek Tavah. When they beheld Moshe breaking something so precious, it would cause them great sadness and remorse. And clearly Moshe wanted to provide an opening for tshuva. And it worked. He waited, right, to do it in front of the people so that they can also react and respond. And so the breaking of the Luchot, which is the height of drama in Act 1 of this story, it's not the end of the story, but actually it is the turning point. And Moshe doesn't give up hope. He has faith in our eternal covenant with God. And he believes, of course, in the possibility of a plan B. And even before he breaks the Luchot, he tries to bring God closer to the people. And then after he breaks the Luchot, he tries to bring the people closer to God. He has faith in the relationship. He doesn't give up on this covenant. And so, after Moshe begs God to forgive the people, we have the opening of Act 2, which is 2 prakim down in Shmot 34. ויאמר השם אל משה, פסול לך 2 לוחות אבנים כראשונים, וכתבתי על הלוחות את הדברים אשר היו על הלוחות הראשונים אשר שיברת. And here it seems pretty clear that God gives his divine haskama to the breaking of the Luchot, and Chazal turn it into an event which is very praiseworthy. In fact, the final Rashi in the Torah, yes? Do you recall? Exactly. ולכל היד החזקה, this is the last pasuk of 5 חומשי תורה, לכל היד החזקה ולכל המורא הגדול אשר עשה משה לעיני כל ישראל. Rashi says this refers to the fact that Moshe's heart inspired him to shatter the tablets before their eyes. And אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה, אשר שיברת יישר כוחך אשר שיברת. The Lubavitcher Rebbe here explains that Moshe, in the Chumash of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, do any of you have that edition? You'll see there, he asks the question, how could Rashi end with a seemingly destructive act of breaking the Luchot? And he explains that Moshe, who was the great defender of the Jewish people, was making the statement that if you have Torah, the people win. Yeah, the people win. The people come first. The Meshech Chochmah, Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, he wants to suggest here that Moshe wanted to demonstrate to the people that the tablets themselves did not possess any intrinsic kedusha. Nothing, in fact, save for God. It's God who gives kedusha, provides kedusha, infuses things, that we infuse things when we have that intent, that divine intent. And so the Luchot no longer had any kedusha. But Moshe did break these Luchot. And the Midrash says the following. I'll read it to you in Hebrew because all of you seem pretty... okay, so I'll read it in English for sure. Moshe started feeling bad that he broke the tablets. So God told him, do not feel bad about the first tablets, for they only contain the 10 Commandments. However, in the second tablets I will give you, they will have halacha, midrash, and agadah. And inspired by this midrash, which is in Shmot Rabbah 46, the Netziv on our pasuk of Psol lecha 2 luchot describes the power of the second tablets as follows. I'll just read the English. And the meaning of all this is that the first tablets were not given the power of innovation, but what Moshe received was the accuracy of the reading and the halachot that come out of it, but not to innovate anything in halacha by 13 midot and the like, which are the Talmud. And there was no oral Torah, but what was received from the mouth of Moshe. But in the second tablet, power is given to every veteran student, Talmid Vatik in his words, lechadesh, to innovate halacha according to the midot. The Netziv, it's so beautiful. And for this very reason, it's a very long Netziv, for this very reason that the Almighty ordered that there be the second tablet sculpted by Moses, not because they did not deserve God's act, but to instruct that halacha is renewed by the power of these tablets, which is the participation of human labor in the heavenly endeavor. In his language, I just would like to read you the Hebrew. אלא להורות ההלכה המתחדשת בכוח הלוחות הללו היא השתתפות עמל האדם בסייעתא דשמיא. כמו עצם הלוחות שהיה מעשה משה וכתיבת הקדוש ברוך הוא. Like the very tablets, they were the work of Moshe, but the writing of God. And by virtue of the second tablets, everything was included. Perhaps this is the place to mention that in the story of Matan Torah, Revelation in Devarim, God tells Moshe to place the Luchot in an ark. And there are several opinions as to what exactly this ark is.
Is that the first section or the second section?
It's not so clear. V'samta et haluchot ba'aron. So there are different opinions. Which luchot, which ark, is this the same ark, is it a second ark? But this is the source for the tradition that actually both sets of tablets, the broken ones and the second set, were placed in the Holy Ark of the Covenant. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, in the book Shulchan Shabbat, he has a lot of very interesting things to say about broken tablets. Do any of you have that book? It's like a collection of stories. Describes this, the breaking of the tablets, as a positive heartbreak. And I'm going to read you this short excerpt. The Torah given on Mount Sinai was limited. It did not have the infinite expanses of the oral Torah because the Israelites were not a vehicle for such revelation. However, after they sinned with the calf and Moshe Rabbeinu broke the tablets before their eyes, the Israelites felt a deep sense of unworthiness. Their hearts were broken. This supplication was a tool that allowed them to receive the oral Torah and the second tablets. This is therefore the meaning of the tablets and the fragments of the tablets that were placed in the ark. The complete tablets symbolize the feeling of ascension, and the fragments of the tablets symbolize the heartbreak and supplication that a Jew should feel towards the Torah. He brings the pasuk, "V'nafshi ka'afar lakol tihyeh." These two feelings.
And דבר שלם יותר מלב שבור.
מלב שבור, that's right. And Rav Kook, and yeah. These two feelings, it's a good word for chuppah. These two, before the breaking of the glass, these two feelings should be present simultaneously in the heart of a Jew. Then he becomes a vessel for the light of the Torah. Okay, let's get back to Revelation.
Do you have any source that they actually picked up the broken tablets?
That they actually,
Picked up the remnants of the broken
what do you mean
tablets?
that they picked up?
That they gathered them, that
They were kept somewhere. They were put into the Aron.
Is
is there any?
dispersed, like, you know, the Chafer Kadisha, after there's a Pigua, they come and they collect the body parts.
I understand your question. So, aside from this Masoret that we have, we don't have anywhere an account in the Torah of burying them or destroying them totally in any way. Like the egel, right? The egel had to be ground up and then ingested, yeah. We don't have any of that with the broken tablets. So, according to the Masoret, they were kept. Yeah, and there are many, many sources for it, like in the Midrash and several Gemarot. Okay.
I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
Batya, that we've been talking about two different types of revelation. Torah Shebichtav in the first Luchot, and essentially Torah Shebaal in the second Luchot. And we talk about Torah Shebaal being derived from Shlosh Esrei Midot, 13 principles of drasha. But I never thought about the conjunction between the first Luchot and their breaking and Shlosh Esrei Midot HaRachamim, right? The 13 principles, the 13 qualities of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which include the mercy as well as the justice, and which is happened within the context of the breaking of the Luchot. And it's almost as if the Gimel Midot HaRachamim moved into the Gimel Midot that we use to create Torah, which is what makes Torah fit into human life.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
I've never thought of that conjunction. It's such a beautiful.
Absolutely. It's my father's, really.
I had another thought that it's a parallel which I've never thought of until you said this, the parallel between the two Briot. The Bria Rishonah of Din that we couldn't keep, and the Bria of Rachamim that follows it. It's very parallel with the two sets of Luchot, and I've never thought about that either. That there's a parallel between the two ways.
Between Midat HaDin and Midat
We
HaRachamim.
couldn't have a Bria from Din, so we had to have a second Bria, second story with Rachamim. And it's a similar idea that you have the first set of Luchot. You couldn't hold up to them.
Absolutely.
And the second one.
Absolutely.
So
Lo Bashamayim, and this is
comes down to parallelism.
beautiful. Yes, yes. So, here we are at the culmination of Revelation, which are the 13 midot, right? God comes down in a cloud, Vayeret Hashem ba'anan, Vayityatzeh v'mosham, Vayikra b'shem Hashem, Vayavor Hashem al panav, Vayikra Hashem Hashem, Kel Rachum v'chanun, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. So God reveals himself as a compassionate God, a God of forgiveness. We're given a second chance then and forever. Now, how do we understand the story of Revelation? Okay, I don't have one answer because this is something which is really not so clear, and there are many, many ways of understanding Revelation. What exactly did we receive as part of the second giving of the law? Was the oral law revealed separately as a distinct corpus, or is it a participatory project going forward? Right? Like a work in process. And how do we relate to the status of the oral law? What is the role of human agency in the process of exegesis? And to what extent today, are we empowered to exercise innovation? Okay, these are all questions that I grapple with all the time, and I'm sure you do too. I think they're serious questions. And I hope that this reading possibly can suggest some answers. In his essay, Professor Weiss Halivni represents one model of theology, and I'll just bring you his summary. Ever since the breaking of the tablets, the sin of the golden calf, Torah has been an interplay between the divine and the human, an attempt to reconstitute the Torah of revelation. While acknowledging the brokenness that arises from human history, even in the Torah itself, we may acknowledge the noble strivings of our forebears and ourselves to recapture the Torah of Sinai. So this seems to definitely be a motion of going back to Sinai, right? Like to capture what was given as part of the oral law. Now, in this discussion, of course, when I spoke to my father about this idea that it's kind of been with me now for the last month or so. So my father said to me, well, clearly the second tablets have a higher status in his view. They represent the Torah of the people. It's the people's Torah. And we interpret the Torah using the 13 midot of God, and I'm sure you've heard this from my father many times, that Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Hey Vav is actually grammatically interchangeable with Hey Vet, the Vav and Vet, with Ahava. So it's a God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Midat HaRachamim, is the God of love. And we, of course, are to model ourselves after these 13 attributes of God. Mahu Rachum Afata Rachum, Mahu Chanun Afata Chanun. That's the mantra that I was raised on in my home. And like you said, Sarah Jo, it's no coincidence that there are Yud Gimel Midot of Rachamim and Yud Gimel Midot Torah Nidreshet Bahem. Because, in fact, Hainu Hach, it's the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so in conclusion, in the first part of our story, the sin of the golden calf undermines that first experience of theophany. And the people hearing Aseret HaDibrot, the Decalogue, the people reject God's covenantal arrangement with them. But the breaking of the first luchot, and it seems to me that this is definitely the driving force that propels the second part of the story, which is our central story. It begins with the fabrication of the second luchot by Moshe. And all the additional properties that were attached to them and that Chazal have also focused on as far as the participatory aspect of Torah throughout the ages that continues, of course. So we see that the breaking of those tablets actually provided for us an opportunity not only for kapara, for repentance, but also for renewal. And this is the collaborative project of the oral Torah. And now I'd like to bring us also to that parallel of the broken tablets in Aron HaBrit, in the Holy Ark of the Covenant. Because it seems like the fact that we have those broken tablets also, together with the whole tablets. That's how it was for generations. They serve as a reminder, right? A reminder, and maybe like a caution. But I'd like to add here what Rav Soloveitchik points out in Al HaTshuva. It is the memory of sin that releases the power within the inner depths of the soul of the penitent to do greater things than even before. The energy of sin can be used to bring one to new heights. So, like the Luchot, they weren't destroyed totally, they weren't washed away. And our past misdeeds are not just washed away, they don't disappear, and they do remain a part of us. But they hopefully serve as an incentive for us to recreate ourselves and to renew. And they remind us also of our pitfalls, but also of our great potential going forward. So we want to keep the Shvarim close by. Now, in our shul in Leverfrat, I don't know if you know this, Sarah Jo, inside the Aron HaKodesh, behind those sculptural wooden doors, we have beautiful parochet, the Torah is hanging, and underneath there's gravel. And in the gravel are slabs of broken stones with some Hebrew lettering on. Clearly the artist worked it into the design to remind us that we continue to carry those broken tablets. And one of my favorite songs, How Fragile We Are. Yeah. So, inside our Holy Ark, I think I would argue that we carry also both sets of tablets. And on this Yom Kippur, my bracha to all of us is that we feel the power of forgiveness from God and the power of renewal that is in our hands. And may the Torah reflect the attributes of God and illuminate our world. Thank you so much for learning together.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.